One of the ironies, I think, in Western politics or throughout the democratic world over the last, let's say, decade or so, has been there is a group of people, a very powerful faction, you could say the kind of establishment faction that's composed of both the center left and the center right in most Western democracies that have engaged in all sorts of highly classically anti-democratic measures in the name of saving democracy. They herald themselves as the saviors and guardians of democracy. They say that only their enemies are a threat to democracy. They're the saviors of it. But the reality of politics in the democratic world over the last decade has been that for a variety of factors, in the US you can go back to the war on terror and the lies of the Iraq war, but more recently the 2008 financial crisis, whose repercussions are expressing themselves to this very day, jeopardizing people's financial security, the policies of free trade and deindustrialization, and then all the deceit and crackdowns around COVID have turned huge portions of the population into vehement anti-establishment warriors. These people hate these establishments. They hate whoever they perceive as defenders of the status quo. It started to express itself in 2016 with things like the British people voting to leave the EU out of hatred and contempt for EU bureaucrats in Brussels, and then obviously followed a few months later by what was for most people the shocking victory of Donald Trump over the ultimate establishment maven, Hillary Clinton. And ever since then, it's been one after the next. And obviously, historically, when establishments feel threatened by some new event or some shift in political sentiment, their tendency being the establishment is not to assuage it, not to persuade it, but to crush it. And the establishment today, unlike, say, 400 or 500 years ago, are not monarchs in name. They're not churches in name with some sort of absolute say, the way the Catholic Church had over a lot of countries. They have to pretend to be Democrats, people who believe in democracy. That's how they pitch themselves. And so they have been just openly doing things like censoring their political opponents, creating an industry designed to decree truth and falsity that nobody can deviate from with this disinformation industry, and more disturbingly, and I think more desperately, showing how desperate they really are, because in so many countries, the establishment is in deep trouble, typically because of an emerging right-wing populist movement, occasionally because of left-wing populism as well, both of which manifest as anti-establishment movements. Their solution has just been to basically bar democracy, limit democracy, prevent the most popular opponents of the establishment, typically right-wing populists, from even running on the ballot, from just saying you're banished from the election. The thing we're told is what Putin does when he has fraudulent elections because his opponents can't run. These are just theatrical elections that are very stage managed. That's exactly what has been happening throughout the democratic world in multiple different countries over at least the last decade. And a lot of people are noticing that even more now because of what happened in France. Here from the New York Times yesterday, Marine Le Pen barred from French presidential run after embezzlement ruling. Quote, the verdict effectively barred the current frontrunner in the 2027 presidential election. You're going to see how common that fact is in all of these cases. She's the current frontrunner in the 2027 presidential election, meaning the French people, the French citizens, a plurality of them, or a majority of them, want Marine Le Pen to be their next president. But it bars her from the 2027 presidential election, from participating in it, an extraordinary step, but one the presiding judge said was necessary because nobody is entitled to, quote, immunity in violation of the rule of law. Jordan Bardella, Ms. Le Pen's protege and a likely presidential candidate in her absence, said on social media, quote, not only has Marine Le Pen been unjustly convicted, French democracy has been executed. The verdict infuriated Ms. Le Pen, an immigrant nationalist politician who has already mounted 3 failed presidential bids. I mean, failed in a very literal sense that she didn't win. But her party and she have been, the party as founded by her father was a very fringe party. And under her leadership, it has become a mainstream party, one of the most powerful parties in France. She made the runoff twice. So it's failure in the sense she didn't become the president, but it's hard to say these are failures in the sense that the French people rejected her. She's been gaining more and more support over the years to the point where her party won first place in the EU parliamentary elections last year in France, which is what really scared the French establishment about the possibility that she could actually become president. Murmuring, quote, incredible, she briskly left the courtroom before the hearing was over. Ms. Le Pen, looking grim, told TF1 television that that the ruling was a, quote, political attempt to thwart her. She said that millions of French people were outraged, and she vowed to fight back despite slim chances of legal success. Quote, let's be clear, she said, I am eliminated, but in reality it's millions of French people whose voices have been eliminated. Notice I have not uttered a syllable about what I think of Marine Le Pen or her politics or anything like that because it's completely irrelevant. If you actually believe in democracy as the premier way to select our leaders, which I do, it should be disturbing if it is actually becoming a weapon to exploit the judicial system or use lawfare to defeat your political opponents, not at the ballot box, not by giving the people in the country the choice to vote for, but by prohibiting them from becoming on the ballot. If it were just one case, then you'd have to spend a lot of time debating Marine Le Pen's case. And we're going to have somebody on this week who has been following Marine Le Pen's case closely, who understands the intricacies of French law in a way that I don't, so I'm not sitting here propounding on the validity or otherwise of her conviction, just the fact that it has now become part of an obvious trend where politicians like her, especially when they become too popular, are being banned. And there are a lot of people in France who are saying so, including people who are, to put it mildly, not Marine Le Pen friends. One of them is the leftist politician Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who has found more popularity too, and he put out a statement on X about this, and it's in French, but the highlighted portion is the part that we think is most relevant, where he said the decision to remove an elected official should be up to the people. Meaning, even if you find her guilty, okay, let the people decide whether they want her as president. Laurent Wauquiez, who is the head of the right-wing Republicans, said something similar. He posted a tweet on X as well, and the translation is, quote, the decision to convict Marine Le Pen is both weighty and exceptional. In a democracy, it is unhealthy for an elected official to be barred from running for office. Political debates must be decided at the ballot box by the French people. Oh no, it seems extremely obvious to me. In the United States, of course, even if you're convicted of a crime, then it doesn't mean that you can't run. The socialist leader Eugene Debs ran for president as a third-party candidate during the Wilson administration from prison. Had the Democrats succeeded in convicting and imprisoning Trump before the election, as they were desperately trying to do, that would not have resulted in his being banned from the ballot. He could have run even as a convicted felon. In fact, they did convict him of a felony charge or multiple repetitive felony charges in New York, and he still was permitted to win, and the American people decided. We know he was convicted. We don't trust that conviction. We think it's politically motivated. And in any event, we want him to be our president. That's what democracy means. The Democrats tried other ways to get him banned from the ballot, as we'll get to, and they almost succeeded. That was clearly their goal. But in the United States, at least, it's left to the people to decide. And that's what a lot of French politicians across the political spectrum are saying. Here's the polling data, the most recent polling data on the French presidential elections from the International Market Research Group on March 31st. Intentions to vote in the presidential election, quote, 2 years before the next presidential election. An IFOP poll for the journal Du Dimanche reveals the voting intentions of the French people for the next presidential election. In the most favorable scenario, the National Rally candidate would collect 37% of voting intentions, that's Marine Le Pen's party, nearly 14 points more than her score in the first round in 2022. Edouard Philippe appears to be the best placed candidate to qualify for the second round against Marine Le Pen. His score ranges between 20 and 25%, depending on the different configurations tested. So she's not just leading in the polls, she's leading the polls by far. Not enough to avoid a runoff. She's made the runoff twice now and lost to Macron. But the question is not, is Marine Le Pen going to be in the second round? She for sure will be. The question is, who can get just enough to make it with her. And unlike in the past in France, where that party was considered toxic and off limits, where everybody would unite to prevent it from gaining any power, that's not really the case anymore. I mean, you did see that in the subsequent parliamentary elections in France that Macron called after Marine Le Pen's party won the EU parliamentary elections, and he called new elections for the parliament. So the parliament called new elections, and the left-wing coalition led by Mélenchon, but he wasn't really the candidate because he's too, he alienates too many people outside the actual left, came in first. Macron's party came in second. Le Pen's party came in third, but it was very closely disputed. So there's the possibility that there could be a coalition to defeat her. We're likely never to find out because the French establishment is too afraid to let her run on the ballot as fear that she might win. As I said, if that were an isolated case, we could just sort of say, well, is Marine Le Pen guilty? That's the French law, but it's by far not an isolated case. It has become the common scenario. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.